So in the last video we were talking about chord scales and how to construct them and what they're used for and what they're not used for. And in this video we're going to start by reviewing what we talked about last time. So let's take a different key besides C major, let's take E flat major, and let's go through the process for finding a diatonic chord scale. So step one, we're going to spell the chord and then analyze its Roman numeral chord function. In this case we're going to take G minor 7, which is 3 minor 7 in the key of E flat, G, B flat, D, F. Step two, we're going to analyze the chord tones. So G is the root, B flat is the minor third, D is the fifth, and F is the minor seventh, the flat 7. Step three, we're going to fill in the three notes from the key of E flat that fall in between the chord tones. So in between G and B flat in the key of E flat is an A flat, in between B flat and D in the key of E flat is a C, and in between D and F in the key of E flat is an E flat. And there we go, there's our chord scale. Step four, we're going to measure the distance up from the chord tones to the three notes from the key, and then step five, we're going to analyze these notes. If they're a major second above a chord tone, they're going to be labeled as tensions. That's the definition of a tension. So in this case, C is the only tension on this chord scale. And so we're going to label it tension 11. And if they're a minor second above a chord tone, then they're going to be labeled scale degrees. In this case, we have A flat and E flat, which are minor seconds above chord tones, and they're going to be labeled scale degree flat 2 and scale degree flat 6. And then finally, we're going to name the chord scale. And we're going to name it based on its modal name. It's not a mode, but we're still going to name it based on its modal name. In this case, we have G Phrygian, the G Phrygian chord scale on a G minor 7, the 3 minor 7 of E flat major. 1, S flat 2, flat 3, tension 11, 5, S flat 6, and flat 7. So there's an exception to this idea that tensions are a whole step above a chord tone and scale degrees are a half step above a chord tone. And that exception falls with the 2 minor 7. So let's take the 2 minor 7 in the key of C, D minor 7, D, F, A, C. Alright, let's take a look at this chord scale. Now notice that we analyzed the B as an S6 and not as a tension 13. Why is that? It should be a tension 13 because it's a whole step above a chord tone. Now going back to our original definition of tensions and scale degrees, we remember that scale degrees are notes which obscure the chord function and tensions are ones that don't obscure the chord function, they just add color. So if we take a look at a functional context, in other words a 2-5-1 chord progression, and then we look at the distance between B and F, in other words the S6 and the minor third of the D minor 7, F, we get a tritone. Now this tritone is the characteristic sound of a 5-7 that governs the tension release pattern of 5 going to 1. So what all this means is that if we include the B on a 2 minor 7, it's not necessarily going to sound like a 2, it's going to kind of sound like a 5. So if I play a regular 2-5-1 without the B, you can hear it very clearly that that's a 2-5-1. But if I include the B on the D minor 7, it's a little more obscure. It kind of sounds like, oh, is that 5 over the 5th, or is it a 2? So now let's take a look at some non-diatonic chord scales. Now the first kind of non-diatonic chord scale we're going to look at are the chord scales for secondary dominant chords. There are 5 secondary dominant chords, 5 of 4, 5 of 5, 5 of 2, 5 of 6, and 5 of 3. We're going to take a look at the 5 of 6 secondary dominant and the key of E flat, because I feel like doing E flat today apparently, which is going to be a G7. So step one, we're going to spell the chord and analyze its Roman numeral function. G7, 5, 7 of 6, key of E flat. So step two, we're going to analyze the chord tones. So we got G, B natural, D, and F, which is the root, the third, the fifth, and the minor seventh. And step three, this is where things start to diverge from the diatonic chord scales. We're going to fill in all the notes from the key that fit in between the chord tones. Now, normally in diatonic chord scales there are only 3 notes, but in this case, in some secondary dominant chord scales, not all of them, but in this case, there are actually 4 notes from the key that fit in between the chord tones. In between G and B natural, we have A flat and B flat. In between B natural and D, we have C. In between D and F, we have E flat. So this is our chord scale. It's actually an 8-note chord scale. Some chord scales can have 8 notes, some actually can have 6 notes, but in general 7 is the general rule of thumb. Anyway, step 4, measure the distance from these notes up to the chord tones. So we have these measurements. And then for step 5, this is where things diverge a little for dominant chords. You're going to analyze these notes. If they're any distance from the root or fifth, it doesn't matter if they're major or minor second, or even a minor third in this case, they're going to be labeled as a tension. Why is this? Dominant seventh chords, the point of dominant seventh chords is to get as much tension in the chord sound as possible before resolving. So normally you wouldn't like the sound of this. That's pretty harsh, minor ninth. But if you put it in the context of a dominant seventh chord, that sounds nice, especially if it resolves. So in this case, we're going to analyze these notes which are minor second above a chord tone as tensions. Tension flat 9 to A flat and tension flat 13 to E flat. Now the B flat's interesting because the distance between G and B is a minor third, but we already have a third in this chord. We have the natural 3. So we're going to analyze it the classical way of analyzing it as a tension sharp 9, or the augmented ninth. Now if they're a minor second above the third, we're still going to label these scale degrees, or avoid notes. And the reason for that is because in typical tonal contexts, dominant seventh chords resolve up a fourth. So if you include this note minor second above the third, which is the perfect fourth above the third, it's the tonic of the resolution of the dominant seventh chord. So in other words, you've resolved before you've created the tension, and there's some weird dynamics happening, and it kind of sounds wrong. So you tend to not want to do that, and that's why it's called the scale degree. And then finally, you're going to name the final chord scale with the Greek mode, but in general, they might have some alterations. So we're going to have a G. This is our G Mixolydian flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13 chord scale, which is 1 tension 9, tension sharp 9, 3 S4, 5 tension flat 13, flat 7.